Welcome to the Anita Stewart Memorial Food Lab at the University of Guelph. I'm very happy to be here today with Ajoa Mintah from For All Ice Cream in Kitchener-Waterloo. My name is Doug Goff, and I'm a professor in the Department of Food Science at the University of Guelph. I'm now just about 35 years on the faculty here, and for all of that time, I've been teaching the ice cream technology course at the University of Guelph. So we'll talk more about that in detail in a moment, but it's certainly a pleasure for me to be here and to be the host for today's event. Before we begin, we want to offer our respect to the many First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people on whose lands we work and live. We acknowledge that the University of Guelph resides on the ancestral lands of the Attawandaron people and the treaty lands and territory of the Mississaugas of the Credit. We recognize and support the calls for action by the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, and we vow to hold governments accountable and advocate for concrete actions towards reconciliation moving forward. Today's event is a continuation of our Deep Dish Dialogue series. I hope that many of you have tuned in to some of our previous shows, and they're designed to showcase chefs and food experts while discussing some impactful subjects. This event is brought to you by the Earl Food Institute in partnership with the Gordon S. Lang School of Business and Economics at the University of Guelph, and of course, we are Canada's Food University. It's a personal pleasure for me to be here in the Anita Stewart Memorial Food Lab. I worked with Anita on several special projects over the years, and one in particular was that Anita was showcasing University of Guelph products, as she was so great to do, and she had a special peach that was from Vineland Research Station, and she wanted me to convert these peaches into a peach ice cream that was served at a special event at the Royal Agricultural Winter Fair in Toronto. So we had great fun doing that, and it was just an example of the kinds of interactions that we had with Anita over the many years. Before we begin our demonstration, I want to let you know that you can ask questions at any point along the way, either in the YouTube comments section or by using the hashtag DeepDishDialogues on Twitter, and we'll hopefully address as many questions as we can. This is a little departure, perhaps, from some of the themes that we've previously had. It's the end of May, we're coming into the summer season, and so we thought that hosting a show on ice cream would be a really fun thing to do. So we want to have a deep dish dialogue, but at the same time, keep today's program fun. So very welcome to Ajoa. Before we begin, maybe we can, you can just introduce yourself to us a little bit, tell us all about your business and then your connection to the university.
Sounds perfect. Thank you so much, Professor Goff, and thank you so much for having me. I'll start off by introducing myself simply. I'm Ajoa Mintah. I'm a chemical engineer turned food entrepreneur. I had an idea back in 2016 that I wanted to make ice cream. And for me, ice cream was actually a celebration of what I thought was amazing about this area. It was something that was going to allow me to continue to be an engineer, but on my own terms. Specifically, I'm a chemical engineer, and chemical engineers focus on designing processes. It would let me celebrate this region, because I feel like, you know, I was amazed that 10 minutes in any direction, when I moved here back in 2012, but I was amazed that 10 minutes in any direction, I was at a farm, whether it was a dairy farm or fruit farm, I thought it was incredible. Mm-hmm. And I also thought that this community had just a lot of other food entrepreneurs, and for me, ice cream was going to be a way for me to help showcase what I thought was great about this region. I met you back in December 2016 because, you know, much to my amazement, and I feel like some luck, you know, renowned ice cream professor, Professor Goff, was at the University of Guelph, and I found out that there was a short course offered once a year. I think it's now offered twice a year. It's that popular. But I was able to get on the short course and really just understand the science behind ice cream, which really helped For All figure out, you know, what was our point of view going to be and how are we going to present ice cream, and just making sure that what For All stood for from an ice cream perspective was it was as pure as possible. One of our taglines is natural, local, mindful. Natural meaning that we're always going to make our ice cream using real food because we can, and the science supports that. Local, because I love this region and I wanted to showcase what was here. And mindful, because we wanted to just really pay attention to, what are people consuming? So first and foremost, we are dairy. However, we do have a pretty good specialization in non-dairy flavors as well. And that is also owing, just again, understanding the science of what is ice cream. So that's a little bit about me and a little bit about For All Ice Cream and kind of our start.
That's great. And that's part of your For All's mission, is to be to have products for everybody.
Exactly that. Yeah, we're not necessarily everything for everybody, but we want to be something for everybody.
Great. So let's jump right into it then. Today's presentation is going to be a sort of a spectrum from homemade ice cream through to commercial ice cream. So I laid out some ingredients here that we would use in making an ice cream at home, or an ice cream at home, or ice cream mix at home. And I'll just start by explaining what would go into a mix. So when we make ice cream, we make our liquid mix. This is Ajoa's mix here that she's going to use to actually make the ice cream this afternoon. So to make that mix, we have a homemade recipe that we've provided. The homemade recipe is just simple table cream, and that's at 18% fat. And then skim milk powder added to that to bring up the protein level and bring up the total solids level in the cream. And then sugar, so basic ingredients, as you say, simple mix ingredients. And then we, in the homemade recipe, would use eggs and Knox gelatin. And we use this as a stabilizer. We'll mention in a moment that when we get into the commercial realm, there's other choices that behave better than gelatin. But gelatin is easy to find in the grocery store and makes a good stabilizer then for a homemade recipe. I have here a double boiler pot, so if you were going to blend the ingredients together and heat them, as you would need to do if you were using raw eggs to make sure it was properly pasteurized, we would always advise that you do that in a double boiler over water so that the milk doesn't burn on the bottom of the pot. So just a typical stock pot over a base of water. Then we'd mix that up and agitate it. It's always great to keep track of the temperature. So we've got just a digital thermometer, or even a candy thermometer would help you to keep track of the temperature in making a homemade mix in the kitchen. So if you were going to go to your shop, what would mix making look like in your shop?
I would start by saying that it's not that different than what you've got laid out here, but in some ways very different. First of all, scale is a lot different. We are a small batch manufacturer, and so our batches are still relatively small. So when we make our mix, we make about 105 liters at a time. Mm-hmm. Bigger than home, but I'm sure there's other businesses that are much, much larger, but that's where we are scale-wise. Our vessel is very similar to the one that you've laid out here. It's essentially a water jacket. We get our ingredients in there, so we work with milk, we work with cream. We're working with all pasteurized ingredients, including our egg yolk. So egg yolk, a combination of egg yolk, egg yolk is our emulsifier that we use. It's an all-natural emulsifier for us. And then we also use stabilizers. Instead of using the gelatin like you do here, we have a combination of guar gum and locust bean gum. A little bit harder to find, but a lot more effective than the gelatin would be. What we also like about them is that they're all natural and they're plant-based. Mm-hmm. So that's kind of a plus for us. And so we combine, our milk, our cream, our stabilizers, and sugar into a vat very similar to that. We heat it up to, our equipment's in Fahrenheit, but we heat it up to a certain temperature and we hold it. And this is basically the pasteurization process. Although all of our ingredients are already pasteurized, we're basically going through a controlled cook. So we heat up our ingredients, we hold them at a certain temperature, and then we cool it down. And we let that mix age, and that's the basis. So it's very, very similar, but scale is a lot different, and ingredient choices are a little bit different as well. You've got eggs here. When I first started, For All, we were cracking eggs, by the dozens of dozens. But it's the egg yolks that are actually functional. So we, shortcut right to egg yolks. We get, pasteurized frozen egg yolks. Skim milk powder is another ingredient that you mentioned, where it really helps with increasing the protein content and also just increasing the solid content. We use that as well. So very, very similar, but just scale is very different.
Great. So then in the next step in ice cream making, what a company would do would be to make a basic white mix. Typically, they might make 2 or 3 different base mixes. They might make a chocolate mix. But then in terms of all of the potential flavorings, they all get added in subsequent to the mix making process. So what are we going to do today, Ajoa?
So we brought, I brought with me one of our most popular flavors, but we're going to be executing a twist on one of those flavors. So one of our most popular flavors since we started is our whiskey caramel pecan. But today we're going to be making a bit of a twist to it. So whiskey maple caramel walnut flavor is what we're going to be making today.
Wow, that sounds good. We can hardly wait.
It's very, very good.
And so before we do get started on the ice cream making itself, just give us some other examples of the kinds of flavors that are popular at For All and where some of those flavors would be sourced.
For sure. So one of my personal favorites actually is vanilla. And one of the things that I love about our vanilla flavor is that it really showcases the dairy that we use. And it's actually the favorite flavor of our dairy supplier as well, Jim Eby from Eby Manor. So again, it sounds basic, but again, to me, it's as pure as ice cream can get. Like there's nothing to hide behind when you've got vanilla. Our number one seller's got to be salted caramel though, where the flavor is just sugar, but we're caramelizing that. So we take that to a deep caramel, and then that's the flavor. In that case, we actually use, you mentioned that some companies would have different versions of mix. So we actually have two main variations of our white mix. We have one that's already pre-sweetened, and then we have one that we call our high-fat mix because the fat content's a little bit higher, but after we've added the other ingredients, it's then normalized back to the 14% that we work at. And the reason we do that is that there's certain flavors where sugar, because sugar is actually very functional in our ice creams, there's certain flavors where sugar is so prevalent in the ingredient that we're bringing in that we need a way to be able to control it. So we basically start off with an unsweetened base and then reintroduce the sugar in different ways. So we do that with one of our other popular flavors, which is our maple walnut, where that one's sweetened only with maple syrup. And again, because it's essentially sugar, so we're controlling the sugar content by carefully adding it back to the formulation to make sure that we're at the right percentage. And we also do a lot of honey-flavored ice creams as well. So same principle, where we're starting off with our high-fat mix. And so one of our most popular honey flavors is that we do a honey lavender. The honey is sourced locally from Nith Valley apiaries. And then actually, similarly, our maple flavor is also sourced locally from a small maple farm in town as well.
Great. And you mentioned the sugar. One of the big issues for you must be the firmness in the ice cream depending on the sugar content. I just remind participants that one of those functional properties of the sugar is lowering the freezing temperature, and the sugar is in fact what makes ice cream soft and scoopable. Yeah. But in an operation where you want to have lots of tubs of different flavors that all have the same consistency for scooping, you have to make sure that you adjust the sugar to get that level of consistency.
Exactly, and that's why we do have that high fat base, so that when it's important for us to control the sugar, we can, to get the right scoopability. In fact, actually one of the most often asked questions we get as a business is, do we carry keto ice cream? And for us right now, the answer is always, it's sadly no, just because we haven't figured out the science. Maybe this is a project we can work on later, but just the science and what happens if we eliminate sugar and what we're replacing it with. So sugar for us it's a workhorse. It's doing a very, very important job.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, well then let's jump into it. I'll let you go ahead and explain the operation of the freezer that you brought in today, and again compare that to what you would find back in your own shop. And let's start making some ice cream.
Perfect. Well, I can start off with getting our mix ready, and then when I get ready to pour it in, we can talk a little bit about the machine itself.
Sure.
So going back to ingredients, we were talking about how most ice cream companies have a white mix. So this is our white mix. This is what we call our sweet cream base. It's already pre-sweetened. We use organic cane sugar to sweeten it, and it already has the cream, the milk, the egg yolks, sugar, and then our stabilizers, which are the combination of the locust bean gum as well as the guar gum. One of the things that I love about our ice creams is that we actually work with Guernsey milk, and that was a very specific choice because Guernsey milk has a different type of protein, milk protein, the A2 protein, which makes it a little bit easier for more people to digest. Before I started my business, I hardly ever ate ice cream because my thought was I was lactose intolerant, but it turns out that I'm actually just allergic to the casein protein, like the milk protein. So this was a specific choice for all. So if you have dairy sensitivities, give us a try because this might be something that you might be able to tolerate a little bit better. So we're starting off with our mix, which I'm going to pour into this bowl. Let's get that in there. And so this flavor is a whiskey flavor. And keeping true to sourcing local, this is a flavor that we're going to flavor with Dixon's distilled spirits, and they have a delicious maple whiskey ice cream. So we're going to put a little bit in. One of the things that also depresses the freezing point of ice cream is alcohol. So is that right? Did I get that right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Is alcohol. So we actually are limited by how much alcohol we can put in. Some would say that the more the better. Unfortunately, too much means that you will never freeze your ice cream. So I'm going to add the whiskey. However, one of the things that happens when I've added the whiskey is that I've changed concentrations a little bit, and because of the alcohol, I'm actually going to add in a little bit more skim milk powder, and this helps us just rebalance our formulation to get the properties that we want to get a great product with the right mouthfeel and the right texture. So I'm going to add this in. I might need a tool to help blend this. I might take the whisk. I have the blender here, but I'm going to take the whisk maybe to get it blended a little bit. And we're just going to try to get this as uniform as possible. So we'll just do this as an initial mix, and then I'm going to just pulse it with an immersion blender just to try to get that as fine as possible. And again, one of the things that I love that I learned from you, Professor Goff, is just that it's a very careful combination that I feel like just has to be respected. So whenever we're building our flavors, I literally do start with an Excel spreadsheet. I know what my mix properties are. We add our flavors, and then there's a little bit of a process of how do I rebalance and make sure that I'm respecting the ratios that have to be respected. The other funny little thing is, to me anyway, was that ice cream is actually defined by our government as well. So there's certain rules that you have to, if we're going to call it ice cream, there's certain ratios and properties that you have to also respect. So this might get a little noisy. I'm just going to give this a bit of a blend. That looks pretty good. I'm just going to grab this here. And that's essentially the mix. It's now flavored to be a whiskey maple. And then these are my inclusions and variegates, but those will get added after the fact, after we've frozen our mix. So this is my home machine, or my pilot machine, or my prototype machine for we use this actually in my facility all the time when we're testing new flavors. It lets us make tiny little batches just to see, does this work as an ice cream? Will it freeze properly? When we're done freezing it, will it scoop properly? So we use this often. This is very similar to our batch machine as well. There's a compressor. I'm just going to turn the compressor on right now. There's an agitator. So once I get this on, I'm just going to turn on the power or the timer. And then there's an agitator, which is going to basically move the mix. So what's happening is that the ice cream is going to freeze to the sides of the cylinder, but as it freezes, it's going to get scraped off. And that basically happens until the mix is frozen and nice and thick. One of the ways to tell if your ice cream is done is by temping it. I think it's -5 that we test to, but we'll do a combination of either temping it or kind of eyeballing it. But we're gonna do that to get it to frozen. So nice and simple. We're gonna pour this in here. I like to do when it's spinning, because if not, you sometimes get stuff that's stuck on the sides that doesn't blend properly. I'm just going to get it in here. There you go. And I'm going to give it a close. And so basically, the water is going to start freezing in the ice cream, and we're trying to form ice crystals, or we are going to be forming ice crystal, but the goal is to have the ice crystals be as small as possible, and that lends itself to the creaminess of an ice cream. One of the things I learned was that the human tongue can detect, I think it was 40 microns or larger is what we can feel. So we're basically trying to get ice crystals that are, we're trying to get as quickly as we can ice crystals that are smaller than that size, just to ensure a creamy ice cream.
Great. So while that's running, we'll just take the first thing I want to do is just take a couple of minutes to demonstrate the whole spectrum from some home type freezers right through to our commercial freezers. So this is always kind of fun, and I'm sure that some of the viewers out there will have made ice cream at home with an old-fashioned bucket. Inside the bucket was the mix container, and inside the container would be the agitator and the scraper, which again is going to scrape the ice cream as it freezes on the wall, and the agitator is going to help to keep it whipped. And that can was packed into the bucket, and the bucket was packed with ice and salt. And the salt lowers the temperature of the ice, makes a brine that down to about -10 or -12 degrees Celsius, and that brine then is cold enough to freeze the ice cream in the can. Now this particular one has an electric motor, but of course the old ones were a hand crank type freezer. And my mother grew up on a dairy farm in Nova Scotia, and she recalled fondly, you know, after haying in the summer, it was always one of the things that they would do would be to make a big bucket of ice cream for everybody. And of course, they didn't have electricity in those days, so it was all hand cranked. So that's an example of something that would be very much home style. But I'll also take this opportunity now to show you some photographs from our ice cream processing lab at the University of Guelph. So if we could just look at the first PowerPoint slides. So the first thing I'll show you is our mix making equipment. This is a continuous pasteurizer. The mix would be made up, and then it would flow continuously through the heat exchanger. If we can look at the next slide. This is the heat exchanger, the plate pack unit that's on our pasteurizer. So the mix is going to flow continuously through this plate, get heated up, and then homogenized, and then cooled down within the pasteurizing unit. And if we could have a look at the next slide. This is a mix tank, similar to the mix tank that Ajoa would have in her operation. This is in our pilot plant at the University of Guelph. So we have the ability to make up to several thousand liters a day in our pilot plant if we needed to. The Guelph Food Innovation Center operates from the Department of Food Science, and they do a lot of proprietary research projects related to ice cream and non-dairy frozen dessert type products. So they have the opportunity to scale up from the bench scale right through to large scale processing. So if we go on to the next picture, this is the continuous freezer that we have in our pilot plant at the University of Guelph. So there's two freezing techniques as well. The batch freezing process, as we're doing here, where we freeze the entire contents and then remove them from the freezer. But in the operation of a continuous freezer, mix would be continually feeding into one end of the machine, and ice cream would be continually being removed from the other end. So if we can, this would be the mix hopper that you can see in the front center of that photograph. The next photograph. This is the freezing cylinder is actually inside that stainless steel piece of equipment. So you can see the pump at the exit end there where the ice cream would be pumped out of the freezing cylinder. And then the next slide. This would be the ingredient feeder and the ripple pump where we could continuously feed ingredients like our walnuts or like our caramel sauce or any other fruit or nuts or particulate pieces into the semi-frozen ice cream before it's packaged. So these two pieces of equipment would incorporate the inclusions, and then from there we would go into the blast freezer. So I thought I'd show you those pictures to show you our capability at the University of Guelph and just give you the sense of how we move through the spectrum from kitchen to artisanal small scale right through to very large industrial scale in ice cream processing. Okay, thanks for showing those slides. So while this is operating, one other thing that I don't think we mentioned yet, Ajoa, and that's air.
Yes, very, very important. Kind of the secret ingredient of ice cream, or what people don't necessarily think of, is air. Air is a component in ice cream, and it's something called overrun. So when we're making our ice creams at For All, we actually have a very specific target overrun, and it defines, the mouthfeel, it defines the creaminess, it also defines the quality. And so for us, we're working to a nominal 75% overrun, which is pretty good, which is excellent ice cream. And so basically, as it's being whipped and as it's being turned around, we're also just capturing air into the ice cream. So one of the processes that we do this on our commercial scale as well as when we're doing tests like this, is that basically we're working to freeze it. Once it is adequately frozen, we actually turn off the freezer and let the agitator spin for about a minute or two, depending on the flavors that we got, just to get that air content correct. Ice creams that don't have enough air, they're very dense. They're a little bit harder for us to scoop as well. And then there's also the problem of too much air. Just too much air, it makes for something that doesn't feel as luxurious, something that might feel a little bit too fluffy. So we have a very specific target that we work towards.
So that the air is incorporated in the form of tiny bubbles in the ice cream, and so ice cream is a foam. A lot of people don't recognize the importance of that air, but if there wasn't any air in there, it would be frozen hard like a solid block of milk. And so it's the air that gives it the lightness and fluffiness and chewability that ice cream has. So when we say 75% overrun, that means we take 1 liter of mix and we make 1.75 liters of ice cream from that. So at 100% overrun, you would take 1 liter of mix and make 2 liters of ice cream from that. So air indeed is that secret ingredient in there. It increases the yield, but it gives us the lightness that we want in the ice cream without getting too much air in it.
That's very true. And I think that's also sometimes one of the challenges that homemakers might have when they're making ice cream at home. If you don't have an ice cream machine, I've seen techniques, and maybe you can speak to it. I've seen techniques where you can freeze it, but then every couple hours, you do need to take that frozen mixture out, agitate it, stir it, beat it a little bit, and then put it back in. And all you're trying to do in that process is you're actually trying to do 2 things. One is that you're trying to introduce air, but you're also trying to break up ice crystals as well while it's freezing.
Yeah, that's one of the things I hear about homemade ice cream that people say is, it's great right out of the freezer, but the next day it's very hard.
Yeah.
And that's part of the explanation. There just isn't enough air whipped into it.
Yeah.
Ajoa, I'd like to just ask you to talk a little bit about the whole idea of being a food entrepreneur. We've got lots of entrepreneurs that come through our different programs here at the University of Guelph. Often they have a great idea like ice cream or like making a marmalade at home in their kitchen, and they think, wow, I can turn this into a business. What are some of the challenges that you actually went through to become a successful entrepreneur?
That's a great question, and definitely a big part of my journey is that I am a food entrepreneur now, and really it started off with an idea, and I think that's a great place to start is the idea, but you have to be able to put it into practice. So for All, I started off tiny. I started off small because I also just needed to learn my craft as I was learning. So I was able to book a commercial kitchen because most food products you're going to make for consumption can't be made at home and then sold. There are some rules that prevent that from happening. Dairy's even more stringent. However, in my case, I actually didn't know that when I first started. So I had found a commercial kitchen space. I had gotten public health approval to learn how to make ice cream. I had bought a very small ice cream machine. It's actually, I think, similar to one that I think I've seen in your lab. It was a Taylor 104. It made 3 liters at a time. And it was just really to learn how to make ice cream. So kind of one of my first steps is how am I, if this is what I want to do on a commercial scale, here's a home version. I need to be able to translate it into a commercial version. So scale was important to understand and learn. But that doesn't necessarily make a business. I could make ice cream, but so what? I have to be able to market it. I have to be able to sell it. I have to be able to, make sure I'm following all the rules and regulations. So a great resource for me was the Small Business Center. A lot of communities do have a small business center or just like resources where you can get business advice in terms of how to structure, not necessarily how to structure a business, but things that you should know. I feel like a lot of times as an entrepreneur, there's so much that you don't know. And I feel like anybody that's wanting to start the entrepreneurship journey, I feel like one of the things you need to almost accept is that you will make mistakes. And that's kind of part of one of the special things about being an entrepreneur is having that thick skin so that as you walk through and make those steps and missteps that you're able to kind of pick up and keep on going. So with the Small Business Center, I was able to get advice on like how to structure a business plan to really kind of look at what this business could look like. I was connected to, an accountant to learn about bookkeeping. I was connected with a business lawyer just to learn about just the legalities of starting a business. So those were all kind of useful tools to have in my arsenal. But once I'd figured out how to make ice cream, I'm going to interrupt myself only because I'm hearing the sound of this has changed, which means that we need to take a quick look at it. Yeah. So it's coming along really, really nicely. Do you think we should temp it right now to see where we are? So I'm looking for a temperature of about -5 just to see if it's ready. Oh, let me get this. I'm actually going to try to do it while it's still spinning, which might be...
Yeah, it's actually looking very good.
It is looking quite good. And I don't want to... I would almost call it done at this point, but I just want to get a temperature reading. The thermometer's going slower than I'd like, but I'm going to say that it's about done. Okay. So all I'm going to do is I'm going to turn off the freezer, but I'm going to keep the blades going as we get ready to extract it. One of the things I always tell my team is that ice cream does not wait for us. When it's ready, it's ready. It's kind of a drop what you're doing, and the ice cream needs tending to. So I usually let this run for a minute to 2 minutes, depending on the flavor that we're making in our commercial facility. And this is the same for our larger scale flavors. And all I'm trying to do is just make sure that I've got adequate air in it. Mm-hmm. It's not necessarily as important, but just again, that's the process that I'm used to, and that's how we always evaluate, is this going to make what we want it to make? So we try to replicate that as closely as possible when we're doing our test. So at this point, I'm actually going to turn this off, and we're going to start extracting it. So this flavor has a variegated, which is our caramel. Thank you. And it also has an inclusion, which is our walnuts. Our walnuts actually have been toasted already. That brings out the flavor, but they've been toasted in a little bit of coconut oil. And for us, what we're trying to do is we're trying to create a little bit of like a fat barrier around the nuts because we want them to stay as crunchy as possible. And so having that little bit of a fat barrier on the outside helps us, we found that helps keep the nuts crunchy. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to basically put them in a metal pan. I like a metal pan because when you go to freeze this in your freezer, it freezes nice and quick. Normally, I would actually have been keeping this in the freezer already just to make sure that it gets things nice and cold as quickly as possible. And this is actually one of the final steps of making ice cream is getting your ice cream mix frozen. Because right now it's quite soft. I'd say it's about the consistency of a soft serve, which means the ice crystals have gone nice and small, but they can grow. So we actually want to freeze this as quickly as possible. In my facility, and I think Professor Goff mentioned it as well, we have a blast freezer. We have a freezer that basically, it's got great air circulation, and it's gonna help us cool our ice cream down to, I think ours is set to -35, -40, because we're trying to lock those ice crystals as small as possible, as quickly as possible. So this is pretty straightforward. We just kind of layer some of the nuts, I'm going to layer some of the caramel. And I'm doing this in layers because I want to have this all throughout. So let me get this out. This looks and smells really, really good.
Yes, it sure does.
Just going to get this in here. Get you all. Just going to turn this back on just to get it scrape up a little bit better. Some more nuts.
So, and of course, it would be very important in your business that you would get the right ratio of nuts to caramel to ice cream as well.
Yes, very, very much. But we do something pretty similar. Our containers are a little bit bigger, where we layer it, and then we do a little bit of a stir where we want to make sure it's distributed nicely, but we also don't want to, we don't want to incorporate the caramel entirely into the product either. We want that to be like distinct ripples. I feel like I'm not getting all of it, but I think
it's always a challenge for ice cream companies to find that fine balance. You want lots of flavoring in the ice cream, but at the same time, those are very expensive ingredients, and you have to make sure that it's appropriately mixed, but not loaded with too many inclusions that would put the price of your product too high. And you want the consistency in your product so that somebody is going to get the same quantity of material in every scoop.
So basically, I'm trying to mix it, but I'm just trying to make sure it's distributed, but I don't really want to, again, lose the ripples. I'm actually going to add a little bit more.
So this is a very manual operation in an ice cream shop such as you run.
It very, very much so. I mean, we've experimented with equipment, like extruders, hoppers, but we've found that kind of all hands on deck has been our best method. We can see what's going on. We can see when we've got too much. We can see when we need to mix it together. So at this point, this is like 90% of the way there. The last step, though, is making sure it gets frozen nice and hard. So I can maybe pop this into the freezer while we can chat for a bit, and then hopefully we get to sample as well.
Okay, give us a few minutes there, and then we'll have some nice ice cream ready to demonstrate. For those of you who are lucky enough to be here in the room with us, we can also try a little bit. So you were talking about being an entrepreneur. In addition, of course, to being a product developer and a manufacturer, you also become an employer.
Yeah.
So you take on a lot of roles and a lot of responsibilities at the same time.
Definitely. So what I was saying before was that I was able to connect with some resources that really just helped me plan my business. Specific to Earl, I actually we have a scoop shop right now, which does really well. We have a lot of people coming in who get, it's a really great opportunity for them to experience Earl. But the original business model was not to be a scoop shop at all. My expertise was in processing and manufacturing. So the original business model was that we're going to be a manufacturer wholesaler. We were going to make the best ice cream we could figure out how to make, and we're going to get it into other businesses that could sell our product. And that was what the business model was based on. But in opening, we had a zoning certificate that allowed us to use 25% of the square footage for retail, as long as we sold only ice cream and nothing else. So it was kind of a test that, okay, well, I don't think anybody's going to come to this spot to get ice cream, but let's see what that is. One of the things we did, which I think really, people really embraced, though, is that we had a giant window, like in the spot that we were selling our ice cream, we had a giant window where you could see us making the ice cream. And so much to my happy surprise, we just had a lot of customers coming in to observe us making ice cream and also to purchase ice cream. So as an entrepreneur, although that wasn't necessarily the original model, it's also just being able to adapt and kind of seeing what's going on around you. So that's when we kind of adapted, said, okay, we're going to take on a portion where we're going to stay true to what we want to do, which is we make ice cream from the ground up. But we also do retail. So it's a little bit of shuffling around to make that work, and also just a lot of learning. So I would say anybody getting into food entrepreneurship, have a concept, have an idea, look around your community for, I'm going to say, mentors and for guidance, because there are people that know, maybe they don't know your product specifically, but they can help you and they're willing to help you. I was lucky enough when I came to your course that I actually met one of my mentors I think she was your master's student.
Oh, yes.
Catherine, and I'm still in touch with her. And she had, she's based in Denmark. She has a scoop shop in Vietnam as well. And so she was a great resource for me to ask her questions and get some mentorship and some guidance. Completely different markets, completely different areas, but she was happy to share her knowledge and her experience. And I haven't had a chance to visit Denmark, but when she does come to town, we meet up still.
Oh, great.
We've actually even traded recipes, just because we can, or just if I'm having an issue with the formulation, like I've kind of pinged her and said, hey, like we're having a hard time with this. So the point there is that as an entrepreneur, it's really being open to working with others. You need to kind of put yourself out there and ask for that help, and you'll be surprised at kind of the response that you get. And then I had mentioned before that dairy is a bit special in that there's a lot of government oversight into who can make ice cream and what kind of ice cream, and how to make ice cream. I had mentioned before that ice cream is legally defined by the government of Canada, so we had to respect those rules in terms of making our formulation. But we're also a licensed dairy plant because in the province of Ontario, licensed dairy plants can make ice cream mix and make ice cream. I suppose I could have just bought ice cream mix and had it made, but for us, it was just really important to understand, like we took ice cream down to nothing and then really built it back up, and it was important for us to control everything that went into it. So the choice for us was that we had to be a licensed dairy plant to do that. And so an important piece of information there for an entrepreneur is really just have a good understanding for like what the regulations and the oversight is. It'd be a shame to, get so far along in a business only to realize that, you're not meeting public health requirements or guidelines. So it's, asking for that help, doing some research and just understanding kind of what the oversight is required, and just looking for those community resources. Those are the things that help me get all going.
Those are all great pieces of advice. So then, changing to a slightly different topic, you did mention that one of the things you were impressed by in the Waterloo and Wellington region were the abundance of farms and abundance of food. So have you made it a particular point to try to work with other local entrepreneurs and artisans and incorporate some of their products into your product?
Definitely, yes. For example, this whiskey caramel pecan flavor, I'd come across Dixon's Distilled Spirits. I might have seen them on social media or something like that, and I thought, how cool would it be if we made a whiskey ice cream? And it's easy to go to the LCBO and buy whiskey, but I was like, these guys are doing something amazing. Maybe we can work on a flavor together. So we approached them, and I would say the rest is history. Like it was something that really worked. I had also just reached out to just like farm stores, just to understand like where do you source ingredients from, where do you get supplies from, and I think this like you're saying this area just has an abundance of growers, of producers, of just small batch makers. So we do make it a special point to find them and celebrate them. One of my favorite things to do when I first started is that I would go to St. Jacob's Market and I would just see who's doing something cool that I haven't seen before, or maybe like, maybe I have seen it before, but who's doing it in our backyard, and really figuring out how we can work with them. So we do a lot of like tea inspired flavors. One of my favorites is our Earl Grey and honey flavor. And I'd met a tea supplier that had a stall at St. Jacob's. Now, tea isn't a local ingredient. However, they were a small local business, and they had a point and a message of going out to visit, small farms throughout the world. And so they were, doing the work of making sure that it was responsible farming. So it was just really nice to partner with businesses with similar mindsets, and just really, it was nice to support other businesses, and in turn, who supported us.
Yeah, that message that you portray is also a very important one, I think, for food companies that really of all size, to celebrate that sort of vertical connection from farmers and sustainable farmers through to products, right through to delivering the consumer a very healthy, clean label and sustainably produced product. So just thinking sort of widely around your customer base, what do your customers really want you to do? And what are some of the requests that have been made of you that have been a little bit, you thought maybe a little far out?
Yeah, it's an interesting question in that, so we do say we're mindful, which means that we want to hear what people are looking for and what people need. And if we can deliver it, we want to. And if we can't, we explain why we can't. So for example, I mentioned keto, where, low sugar is the ask. And we've, unfortunately have had to say we don't know how to do it yet because there's a science, which we just haven't had the time to explore. We get a lot of requests just for, somebody knows a farm somewhere. So we do get a lot of requests for specific partnerships. And not necessarily from like our customer base, but I'm thinking of one small farm store where, every once in a while we'll get a call from them in the summer where they've got a supplier who can't sell their fruit at the store because, it's apricots and the apricots are all, they've got brown spots on them. They're perfectly great to use, but they can't sell them. Yeah. And so the request is, well, will you guys buy them and make something with it? And inevitably for us, the answer is absolutely. It's a great price product and it's a way to, it's a way to divert waste. It's not going to get thrown out. We can figure out a way to use it. So we love that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's great. I think those are just wonderful examples of how, you can look around and help each other out and find ways of really, again, celebrating local and showing the wonderful food environment that there is around us here. Well, at this point, let's dig the ice cream out and see what it looks like.
Perfect. I'm looking for our bowls. Are these down here? Actually, okay.
There.
Thank you.
We did have some questions that came in from the participants, and while you're scooping out some ice cream, we'll just run down through a couple of questions. The first one is suggestions for gelatin substitutes for vegetarian home-based makers of ice cream. So guar gum and locust bean gum would be the two that would be most commercially used. And those are what you said that you have available to you. Can you just speak to the how easy it is to source guar gum and locust bean gum?
Yeah, I would say guar gum is a little bit easier to source than locust bean gum, but both are obtainable. I would say that guar gum I've seen more often, like at a Sobeys or at a typical grocery store. You can in their specialty food section, and I feel like more grocery stores actually are increasing those types of sections, like the specialty food, gluten-free. So you might be able to find guar gum sitting on a shelf. Locust bean gum is a little bit more challenging, but there are some online stores like that are within Canada that you could always get that ingredient. Both of those are plant-based, and that's one of the reasons why we love them. For a home baker, some of the tests that I've done, those actually with cornstarch.
Oh yes.
And what it will do is that will help bind water. You would use considerably more than we would, up to maybe 5 to 7 times more than we would use, but cornstarch would be a good alternative as well. You just have to play with the quantities. And again, its main function is it's going to help bind water, which will help out with stabilizing the formation of ice crystals.
Okay.
I'm just going to pop this back into the freezer, or maybe pass this to you.
Yeah, we'll do that.
I can take that.
Now, here's a question for you, Ajoa. Hearing you talk about ice cream as a scientist is really lovely. The ratios and the chemical properties are obviously very important. How much margin for error is this? Is there? And does everything need to be calculated on a spreadsheet and measured precisely, or can we wing it?
I never wing it. I don't want to be doom and gloom, but for me, like ingredients are expensive, and you want to know that it's going to work. So I do start off with a spreadsheet, and for me, it's to get to something great faster. But I'm playing around with like this type of proportion when I'm trying to figure out an ice cream. So I would advise not winging it, just because it might not you might not be exactly what you're looking for. But once you set up your formulations, it's pretty easy. And actually, as a homemaker, though, one of the things you can do that's going to help you get there is get a good ice cream base. So I feel like there was a good ice cream base recipe that was shared. That's 90% of the work already done, right? That mix already has the right ratios and formulas. So if you're starting at that point, then it is a little bit more forgiving in terms of what you can add and can't add. Worst case, it doesn't work out. It's going to taste great. It just might freeze a little bit hard, and there's ways around that as well. So if you've got an ice cream flavor that maybe turned out a little bit too hard, pop it into your fridge for a few minutes before you enjoy it, and it'll still be great.
Yeah, that's great. And I would certainly second that advice, that especially if you are moving from the kitchen realm into the scaling up a little bit, you really need to have very close control over the ingredients that are going in there.
And I would also say, once you have it established, I mean, for us, we make our product on a large scale. Once it's established, there is no winging it. It's me and my team, we follow it to a T. To the extent that we also have like a QC program implemented, and so everything we make gets evaluated. And so if it doesn't meet standard, unfortunately, it doesn't go out, and that's wasted effort. So it is important that once it's established, that you're following the formulation.
Okay, 2 more questions, and then we'll enjoy some of the ice cream. There's a question for me about the ice cream course that I've mentioned. Who comes to the ice cream course, and what are their motivations? Well, we try to cover the whole scale from artisanal entrepreneurs right through to large-scale businesses. So if you look around the local area and even internationally, we've had people from Shaw's and Central Smith and Chapman's and Nestle and Unilever, and we've helped out many artisanal people over the years. So it spans the whole spectrum. The last 2 years have been offered remotely because of the pandemic, but this year we will be back to in-person teaching, and we will have details available very soon on that. So if you go to the Department of Food Science at the University of Guelph on our website, we will very soon have detailed information about the courses that we will be offering in December.
In the year, can I add real quick?
Yeah,
the year that I went, so it was 2016. I mean, we actually ended up forming a Facebook group, so we're all still in touch with each other. But there was a student from Hong Kong who was starting an artisanal business or was looking for information. There was a student from Bangladesh, I think, that came to the course. There was people from Nestle. There were people from the States. There was people from AgriPure. But I was amazed by the wide range, and there are people that had no ice cream business, but we're looking for, how to make a better home ice cream. I was amazed by the range. And I think in our year, we were actually 50-50, like big corporations and small or not quite started yet companies. So I was pretty amazed by the range of people that come in.
I always tell people, if you're thinking about getting into a business, go into it with your eyes wide open, know exactly what you're getting into. And there's no better way to do that than taking some courses, or as you say, reaching out to all the resources that are available to help you decide if that's really what you want to do or not. And if at the end of taking a course like mine, you say, wow, I didn't know it was that complex and I don't think it's right for me, well, that was money very well spent then to learn that. The final point, this is, it says, Ajoa brought her textbook from the ice cream course. Can you show it?
Here.
I should have thought to demonstrate that myself. But
here it is. So this is the course material and the textbook authored by Professor Goff and another gentleman, Richard W. Hartel. So this is the ice cream course, or the course textbook. And then one of the handouts we got in the book, though, this is the course actual, and these are all my original notes and all my calculations. And it's the ice cream technology course, which I took back in 2016. And yeah, this is the book, and it goes from mixed formulations, it goes from mixed calculations, it goes through troubleshooting quality, product quality. So this book lives in my home office or often comes with me into production. If we're seeing a problem, this is the book that comes out. I've actually had the opportunity to actually also send my staff to it. For me, it was so life-changing In terms of just knowledge is so powerful that I've been sending my staff to the course as well. So last year I had 3 team members come and join the virtual class, which they really enjoyed, and it's been helpful for them to make better ice cream as well.
That's great.
Yeah.
So we're nearly to the end of our program.
I feel like we should try ice cream soon.
We are certainly going to try the ice cream next. But just while we do that, perhaps you could show the last slide about the next program. So on June the 23rd, we will be exploring Indigenous food with Joseph Shoana. And so we certainly encourage you to put that on your calendars for the next version of our Deep Dish Dialogues. And thank you everybody for coming. We hope it's been fun and enjoyable. And now we're going to enjoy the ice cream that we made.
Yes, my favorite part.
Should I say cheers?
Definitely.
No, that's very good.
Very, very good. Yeah, so it's a twist on a maple walnut with a little bit of whiskey in there.
The walnuts are great. The caramel is great. I do get the hint of maple on it. And a lovely background note, full and rich flavor. Excellent. So with that, thanks very much, everybody, for participating. And go on out and get yourself some ice cream and enjoy the rest of the day.
Thank you so much.